Assistant Professor Angela Yao, who has recently joined NUS in 2018 from the University of Bonn in Germany, where she was a junior professor. Her research interest is in computer vision and machine learning. Today, she's going to talk about computers looking at people, computer vision for human motion and activity understanding. So without further ado, let us welcome Angela. Angela, all yours.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, I closed my screen share just now, but I think it should be back up again. Okay, yeah. So it's my pleasure to speak with everyone this afternoon. My name is Angela, and so I did my studies in ETH Zurich in Switzerland. So I did both my master's and PhD there, just to give you guys a bit of background about myself. And then I went on and spent 2 years where I co-founded a spin-off to help with smart parking. So because my research is in computer vision, we created a spin-off where we monitor parking spots with cameras to give us an indication of parking availability. And from there, then I decided that I wanted to come back into academia. So then I went onwards to the University of Bonn in Germany, where I started as an assistant professor. And finally, in 2018, I joined the School of Computing at NUS here in Singapore. So it's my pleasure to give you guys a brief look at my research this afternoon. And specifically, I'm working in machine learning and computer vision. And myself and also my research group, we focus on vision-based human motion analysis. And what do we mean by this? Is that we want to do automated analysis of images and video of people. And so this involves looking at the different forms of representations or models or methods and developing new ways to represent or model the images and video so that we can understand what's going on, specifically for images and video of people. And so this involves then answering questions. So we want to endow our computer algorithms to be able to answer questions like maybe where the person is in the scene, and also identify the specific 3D pose. So estimating the 3D joints of the entire human body and also the hands, as we've shown here. So localizing where the person is and then identifying in 3D the key points like the elbows or the wrists or the hands of the person. We also aim at more high-level semantic topics like understanding to answer the question of what is this person doing, right? So we're doing semantic interpretation of the moods of the person. And so in this case, if we look at this picture, what is this person doing? Maybe he's staying still or walking or taking some object. And so the correct answer here is that he's actually opening the drawer. Why am I interested in doing these things? I think a good way to put together the ideas of looking at human motion analysis from images and video. Envision this scenario of we might have robots who help serve us home, but if we don't identify what person is doing and how he moves, then you end up with this scenario here. So that again, in case you didn't catch it. So you can see the robot server is pouring us a drink, but if we're not able to correctly identify that this person has actually moved the cup away, then we end up spilling the drink on the table, right? So this is a very futuristic look at where we would like to go with the type of research that we're currently working on. Now, today, I want to give a slightly more in-depth look at two different topics that we work on in my group, one of which is 3D hand pose estimation. So in 3D hand pose estimation, we're given some images like what you might see here, either in RGB or maybe a depth map. And then we want to estimate the 3D hand pose. So the key points or the joints of the hand in 3D, or maybe even the overall shape. So the shape here we're modeling with a mesh. So we want to know where the 3D location of each of these vertices on the mesh are. And to give you an idea then of what this might look like, so this is our given input image and also our depth image. And in this specific case, this is a video where we're estimating the 3D hand pose from just the depth image. But sometimes these are a little bit hard to see or interpret. So we give the RGB also just to help you with the visualization. And then this is the recovered 3D result, which we've highlighted the key points here, as well as the in 3D from different viewpoints, the rendered results. So why are we interested in looking at 3D hand poses? One of the key application areas where we could use this is to enable new augmented reality and also virtual reality applications. So if you look, for instance, in advanced surgeries or operating rooms in hospitals now, maybe the surgeon is not even in the operating room specifically, but rather is inside the controlling some surgery robot, right? Merely by manipulating his hands. Or he wants to look at some visualizations or some diagrams, but his hands are maybe inside the individual if he is actually in the operating room. And he cannot at the same time control the visualization hardware. So then that way, he doesn't have to get his hands dirty. We can directly interpret his hand gestures and movements to identify specific parts or visualizations, right? And I mean, these types of, these are very futuristic renderings of applications. Maybe these don't quite exist yet, but we're very close to that. So these guys, I think they're wearing HoloLens, and everybody is sharing in on this view of this augmented reality scene here, where they're looking at some visualization of some new building that they're planning, right? And of course, the control and the gesture, again, is based purely on the hand without an actual physical device. So interpreting the 3D poses and shape of the hand allows us to create new interfaces, new human-computer interfaces, especially in up-and-coming augmented and virtual reality applications. Now, from research perspective, why are we interested in hand pose estimation though? It's not just about building up these applications. Hand pose estimation actually is an interesting problem in terms of also because it's actually very hard to get ground truth labels. So now we're developing all sorts of machine learning and deep learning methods to help us solve this problem. But in your classical supervised deep learning solution, this is done via supervised learning. So we have our data samples, then we have our ground truth labels. But for hands and 3D poses of the hands, it's very hard to get labels, basically to accurately measure in 3D where the joints are. So we might be able to come up with some gloves or some sensors to measure this. But then if we have to record sequences where the person is always wearing this hardware, then it doesn't match the scenario that I just showed here, where the hands are very, they're very natural, right? They're not wearing these devices. We might ask people to label the ground truth for us. This is the standard gold standard that we often use in machine learning. It turns out that actually labeling 3D hand joints is very hard to do. So here we're showing two images, two samples, and then two different annotators. And you can see that if you ask this person, annotator 1 to give you some labels and annotator 2 to give you labels, the resulting fitted model between the two annotations are actually quite different, right? So simply put, sometimes the human label is just simply wrong. It's very hard to get it correct. So this makes hand pose estimation a very interesting machine learning problem in that sense too. It's hard to get good and accurate labels. So we are forced to develop algorithms that can handle this type of robustness, either in the quality of the annotation and also to develop algorithms which do not have so much labels available to us. And so one of the ways that we deal with this in my research lab is we work on self-supervised algorithms. And the idea behind self-supervision is that you might start with some pose estimation neural network, and then we apply in between what we call as a differentiable renderer. So this takes the outputs that we get from our neural network that estimates where the poses are and renders an output. So this is a rendering, so this is a computer animation of what we think the hand should look like. And then we can compare it to what we actually observe. And then based on this, we can estimate some loss and feed this loss back then into the pose estimation network to help train the network. So instead of using the difference between the label and our network output to do the classical supervised training, we are using this differentiable renderer instead, and then comparing the differences between our rendering versus the actual observation as a way of supervising our network training. And we can also extend this for meshes as well, so to estimate the 3D shape. So here I'm showing a little video of our inputs in the depth maps, as well as our estimated key points, as well as refined mesh outputs. So meshes are another form of a 3D output that we can generate as well. Supervised in the same way as I mentioned previously. So you can see here we're following the hand pretty faithfully, but not always, as it moves throughout. Another area that we work in for 3D hand pose estimation is to develop generative models. So one good example of this is a variational autoencoder. And from here, the idea is that we want to develop a model which takes as input these 3D hand images, these captured images. And then we do gradual dimensionality reduction to learn some latent representation. And then in this case of an autoencoder, we would then be able to reconstruct it. So this is an approximated version of what our input was. And the interesting part, of course, in these types of models is to know what are we actually representing in this latent representation, and can we separate the different effects that control the way the hand might look. So in this latent representation then, if this is the latent dimensions, we might be able to even, if we design our model well, we can separate the different factors that influence the appearance. So the image context versus the pose itself, we can separate these two factors. And then even further divide this into maybe what controls the pose is the camera position versus the actual pose itself, or separate what this image context between the depth versus an RGB versus a point cloud. And if we're able to disentangle all of these factors within our latent representation, this gives us the ability to control these different aspects when we decode some given representation and generate outputs. So what does this look like then? Is we might have these 3 points here, 3 different samples, and we can use our generative model to generate samples of what the hand might look like in between. And similarly then, when we solve for these specific, so these are the poses associated with each of these samples. So those in the red square are provided samples that we've captured, and these are actually samples that we can generate. And based on a specific pose, because we're able to separate the effects of the pose and the image context, we can take the same hand pose and render different types of backgrounds. And this allows us then to do something called pose transfer, where we take inputs from ground truth hand poses and create images or generate images of the same hand pose, but with all sorts of different backgrounds. So these are our synthesized images, as well as the associated predicted pose. So of course, the predicted pose should match very well to the ground truth, right? And so in this case, then we can bring together many different modalities of depth images, RGB images, also point clouds, and convert them from one modality to the other with our given model. So for the second part of my talk, I want to highlight a slightly different topic, which is about activity recognition. And in this one, I'm specifically going to focus on the topic of complex activities. So this is a topic that my group also focuses on. And a complex activity, what we define it as, is some procedural task that maybe has many different steps or sub-activities that follow some kind of ordering. So in this case, here we're looking at the 6 different steps of how to make coffee in a mocha cup. So you first fill some water, then maybe you grind your coffee, then you put it into your coffee maker, and then you boil it until finally you have some coffee in the mocha pot. Where do we find these types of activities? These are very, very common in videos on YouTube or other online video platforms. And so let me show you an example of what such a video might look like.
My name is Frau. This is Margot the Magician and Mega Wolf, and we're going to show you how to make stovetop coffee. First, boil water in a giant kettle. Once the water is boiled, which is really important because a lot of people put just water inside of the bottom part of the stovetop espresso maker, and it can overheat the coffee and make it be really bitter. And then you put it inside of this little pot, and there's a little line underneath the bolt inside of it, and you fill it up, and then after you do that, you grind the coffee. I picked the Brazil Esperanza coffee that we have because the Brazilian coffees are sweeter and they tend to be more forgiving in the mocha pot. Kenyan coffees are going to be a little bit earthier and a little bit more vegetal. They don't normally work quite as well in the mocha pot. I like coffees that are sweeter. At home, when I grind the coffee, I just look in my little tiny Bodum coffee grinder that I have and grind it for somewhere finer than what would be in a paper filter. This guy goes inside here, and you actually want it kind of full. Everybody doesn't really have these at their house, probably, even though we do, but it's because we're espresso dorks. If you don't, you just use a spoon and you press it down as best you can. So that it's basically even, and you can tap the side of it to get it even. You want to put the top back on here, but you want to use the towel so you don't burn your little fingers. So you just grab it and you twist the top on, then it goes on here. And you turn the volume back up again. Wait until the pot starts to make funny little noises, and they call it the first sneeze or something. It's just like when it starts making noises, you know that it's sucking the coffee up. It might take a while on this contraption.
So let me pause that video there. You guys get the idea. So we get lots of very diverse videos. So this was one example you might find on YouTube of how to make coffee. And so our objective is to analyze. So we're given a whole collection of videos. If I give you 30 or 50 or 100 videos of people making coffee that I've downloaded from YouTube, can we figure out what the individual components or different steps of making coffee are? And this problem, as a machine learning problem, this is actually fully unsupervised. So we're not given any more information other than K, which is the upper bound on the number of sub-activities, so the number of steps, right? So if I just give you a whole bunch of videos of people making coffee, how can we develop algorithms that analyze them and partition it into these individual steps? So these are 3 representations of the video, and then each color is a type of step or sub-activity, and we want to analyze and find the temporal boundaries of each of these steps. And you can imagine these videos, of course, are very diverse, right? So like the example I just showed you, where the person is also, somebody is talking at the same time, there's a lot of background. It's not always focused. It's not nearly as clean as this example I showed you here, where we've already cut it down into the individual steps, right? So one area that we focus on is the segmentation. And then another area that we look at is how to do anticipation. So if I'm seeing this type of, so if this represents a video clip that we observe, watching a person who takes out milk, can we predict what he's going to do next? And the next step naturally is, because he's taken out milk and maybe he poured it into the cup, is that he's probably going to stir the milk inside of his coffee, right? So we predict the next activity and also predict multiple activities into the future and how long each one will be. So we're going to predict that he adds milk, stirs the milk, maybe it takes 2 seconds to add milk, 8 seconds to stir the milk, and then another 4 seconds to put the milk back away. And you can see where this goes is if we are able to make some prediction or anticipation of what a person does. This will also facilitate all sorts of human-robot interactions or intelligent assistance and so on, because this is what gives us this seamless interaction between the intelligent agent versus the person involved. So for sake of time, I'm going to skip through this part on the anticipation. Let me skip ahead here. And the gist of this work was where we were aiming to be able to predict. So before we were predicting what the person does next. In this case, we were predicting inside of a recipe, a full recipe, predicting what the next step might be. So if I'm given ingredients like this, so this is the ground, what we predict. We're going to predict that we bring the milk to a boil versus what the ground truth is in the recipe. Then we make, based on our observation, we might make the next prediction. We think that it should be to add caramel sauce versus the ground truth, and predict the melting of caramel and removing, and then topping with whipped cream and sauce. And so you can see our prediction algorithms are not always perfect, especially when in this case where we're actually making predictions in natural language. Some of them are a little bit nonsensical, right? Like once the caramel has melted, remove from heat and stir in the caramel sauce. But these are actually predictions. And these, the key thing to take away from here is actually that these are predictions on recipes that we've never seen before, right? So we try to train such systems based on all sorts of recipes, but then we give it a brand new recipe that it has never seen before. And based on the knowledge that we've extracted for these multiple steps, for instance, if I understand how a person makes coffee, I might be able to make the similar predictions for making cappuccino, for instance, or mocha. So in my future vision, what I picture is a seamless integration of humans and especially assistant robots in the home. This is what I hope to be my future. And I would like to welcome all of you guys in the audience to join me at the School of Computing at NUS also to make this a reality.
Thank you, Angela, for